All right. So Ryan, tell us a bit more about ICE and how it all started.
Yeah, thanks. So, look, I think it's great that someone like Jules and yourself are really sort of, I guess, starting to talk about how you're seeing or observing that cycling is becoming this, I guess, platform for people to connect and build relationships. And I think, again, your observation of the fact that executives are doing that is definitely something that we've been really fortunate to explore over the last couple of years. Maybe just to go back though a little bit to give you a bit of a story, I guess from where we've come from, which probably explains a little bit more about why we're doing what we're doing. So once I retired from that sporting career that you talked about, I realised I was a bit too old and a bit too slow. I made a transition across into the corporate world. And I guess that observation really quickly enabled me to meet with many senior executives. I went to work for a big consulting company. My role was to go out and sell these big transformational change programs. And what that meant was meeting lots of executives and understanding what their businesses were doing and how we could support them. And really quickly I noticed this I guess this desire for people to connect and talk about what I used to do, which was the triathlon and the cycling and so forth. And it wasn't about me. It was actually really about the fact that they were starting to do some of this stuff. So they were training for a bike ride, or their partner, their wife or their husband was training for a half marathon, or their kids were doing a small triathlon at the weekend. And what did I think? And I think personally, I was then sort of trying to get the conversation back to business, because that was what I was there for, not to talk about the stuff that I used to do. And I think after a little while, I sort of made this observation that actually, these people actually want to connect personally. This is actually really just a bridge to be able to have a conversation that has a bit more substance to it, a bit more depth, really. And so I just let the conversations flow. And over the course of, I guess, 12 months, I made some amazing relationships, friendships perhaps, and decided that I'd sort of take a punt, as we like to say in Australia, and grab a bunch of the guys and girls and go for a bike ride and just enable them to do what I did, which was connect with one another around this shared interest. And like I said earlier, there was a bit of a range there from running through to triathlon, but cycling was the main thing. And I guess, we went for a bike ride. We had some breakfast. I told a few war stories from the days gone by. The older we get, Paul, the better we were.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And there was just this this great energy in the room. And one of the guys, in fact, who was the CFO of one of the big banks in Australia, pulled me aside and said, "Hey, look, you're really onto something with this. Let's keep going." I knew most of these guys before this bike ride, but I didn't know they had this shared interest. And literally within 20 minutes of riding a bike, we're connecting on a completely different level. And so I guess over the course of the next 12 months or so, I continued to build that community up while I had a full-time job. And I just had more and more requests from people saying, "Hey, you've got to do more of this stuff. This is amazing." And I could really see, I guess, that the difference. During that time, I went to a lot of networking drinks and lots of networking functions. And I made this real easy observation that everything was inauthentic. We were creating these artificial environments and putting people in them and putting a drink in their hand and saying, "Hey, go out there and meet people." and to be honest, most senior executives, they'll find a corner in a round room. They don't really want to talk to anybody, right? So what I needed to do is kind of strip away a few layers there and say, look, let's create an environment that's authentic, that's built around something that we have a shared interest in. It could have been anything really, but I guess cycling, just became that obvious opportunity. And I think, from there, we've now grown the business to be in 5 countries now, or 5 cities, I should say, across sort of 3 or 4 core countries. And, the expansion plans, are set to roll into the US and across mainland Europe. We're already in the UK. And I guess all of this has been driven by that community. From the very first ride we did with those 10 members, they've talked to people and so on, and that's now grown out to be a community of 1,000 members globally who've been approved. And you mentioned earlier, the key component for us to make this successful is predominantly we're looking to try and focus on those senior executives, and we can talk a little bit later about why that is. But it's a community that is probably overlooked in terms of some of the other aspects of what we could think of as health. So the emotional side of things.
Yeah. And I think we should just talk about, you said it could be anything, but I think there's something about cycling. I think that maybe it would have worked if it would have been, movie watching club or something like that, with senior execs and, a certain genre, but there's something about cycling. I mean, clearly you and I both love it, and all your folks in ICE love it. But, we was talking, I got to go to an event last night, an ICE event, and we were just having a chat about cycling. Like, why do we love cycling? It's a great way, for one, to see a city. You're not going as fast as you are in a car. Most of the time, unless you're descending down one of these big mountains.
I've seen you descend down some hills, Paul.
It's very slow.
Yeah, oh, come on.
But, it's just a great way to see a city, but you can also still, ride at a conversational pace. You can enjoy exercise and cover a lot of ground, more ground than you would necessarily walking or running. So I think that combining it with cycling was just a really smart move. And I think just a lot of people really enjoy it.
I think you said a word earlier on, which was the social component, and the truth is that there's very few other sports or activities that you can do that you can actually be exercising and have a conversation.
True.
And not only do that, but do it with multiple people. And I think cycling is very conducive to the fact that, you can be outside. Yeah, it takes time as well. I think if you're thinking calorie consumption, I'm sure a 3-hour bike ride is probably only the equivalent of a 45-minute or an hour run, perhaps. But to your point, I think it's the exploration. You're seeing different things. But I do truly believe that it's that community. And many, many people I know that ride a bike, they love the bike riding component, whether they're pushing themselves to beat a PB or training for a world championships, perhaps, all the way through to, just getting out and riding their first 10 miles or 10 kilometers. But a core component of that is who they do it with. And I think doing it is interesting and engaging, but who you do it with is really the richer part of it. And for those of your listeners that, go to a coffee shop that any cyclists frequent, they'll notice that, a lot of those guys and girls are there almost as long as they are out on the bike.
Yes.
And it's a real, I guess, part of the culture in cycling is actually that ability to come back and have a conversation and be with other people. And I guess, the release of the endorphins, throwing a bit of caffeine, you've got this great energy and buzz that happens as a result of it. So for us to capture and harness that, they're kind of magic ingredients,
Yeah, that's my favorite ride of the week is the Saturday ride because it usually includes a coffee stop somewhere along the way. And it's with cycling too, you usually have some sort of story, even if it was just an hour ride into coffee, something along the way, maybe helped somebody up a hill or, had a little fun race, down a straightaway or something like that. There's usually something to share, maybe not from that ride, but from an earlier ride or something with business as well. So it's just an easy way. And like you said, a perfect combination with coffee and cycling. Well, I want to talk a little bit about culture. Y'all have created an amazing culture with ICE. And it makes me think about, I used to work in population health management. And we would look at these big companies' risk profiles. We would get a whole bunch of aggregate data and look to see what their company was at risk for diabetes or obesity or whatever. And one of the things we would also try to do, if they asked us to, was to help them build a culture of wellness. And if you've ever tried to change a culture within an organization, it's like trying to make an aircraft carrier do a U-turn. It's pretty challenging. And one of the things you absolutely have to have is, top-down support. You have to have the senior executives, the C-suite folks, buy into the program, promote the program, and exemplify the program. If they're not doing it, nobody else is really going to do it. So I wonder if you have any stories since you've, been working with these C-suite folks for so long, if you can think of any stories where you've had some changes in like the cultural wellness of an organization based on their participation with ICE.
Yeah, I think there's multiple examples of that, but there's a couple really that stand out to mind for me. One of those in particular is the regional president for Vodafone in Asia, based out of Singapore. Yeah, he was an ICE member. He was one of our partners, so one of our sort of sponsors. And he really understood the value of cycling as a way to connect with other people, hence becoming on as a partner. And I think there was a component of him that, was very conscious of the fact that, hey, look, we're sponsoring or we're partnering with this organization with very specific outlined business objectives. But as a cyclist, I can see how this might be perceived as my hobby, and I'm spending business money on my hobby. And so I think, he recognized at that point that, what he knew that cycling did for him, or what being healthy perhaps did for him, was enable him to meet a whole range of new people who were also a bit like him. So, I guess he sort of set out with a bit of an agenda to enable people within his organization to come for a bike ride with him. And, a lot of these organizations, as you talked about earlier on, they're very hierarchical, that being able to spend time with the number one guy or girl that's running that organization is treated as being a bit of a privilege, perhaps.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so he always made an open opportunity to anyone once he started working with us at ICE to any of his team to say, hey, anyone that wants to go for a ride with me every Friday, I'm going to go for a ride, and you're welcome. And it doesn't matter how fast you ride or what you wear or what bike you have. We're just going to go for a ride and have a coffee afterwards.
Oh, I love that.
And I remember sort of the first time he did it, I was in town and we hosted, I don't know, maybe half a dozen people and went for a ride, and the only coffee shop open, ironically, was McDonald's. So, we stopped in and drank whatever that is that they serve in there that looks like coffee. But, straight away you could see that there was a little bit of nervousness, a bit of apprehension at the beginning on everyone thinking, this guy's going to be really fast and ride off. And he did an amazing job of spending time with everybody. And I think, the half a dozen or so people that went out for that ride then went back and talked to everybody else and said, I just got to spend some time with the boss today. That was great. Cool. And then, over time, that community grew. And I don't think that it was necessarily about cycling. I think it was just about, like we talked about earlier, spending time together and building those relationships. We're doing it by riding a bike and being healthy and outdoors. But that's a bit of a side benefit from the social component that it is that they're doing. And so by stealth, what he did was create a culture of people that really cared passionately about doing things together that were physical. And those two components, are very, very important. I think they kind of accelerate the social component if you're doing something in a healthy environment. And so, within 6 months, there was a riding club within Vodafone. There was a running club within Vodafone, a walking club within Vodafone. And they would all meet on a Friday morning, go off and do their thing, ride, run, walk, and they'd all come back to the same place. And it was just an amazing time. That the guy's now moved on to the UK, but it was an amazing time to watch him change the culture from people that were perhaps very focused on, perhaps more of the traditional ways of hanging out, in bars and restaurants and so forth. And people getting up early and going out and enjoying it, and it's still a culture that's emanating today. I was there last week, and I didn't get to go for a ride with them, but I saw them out riding together in their branded kits, going out there and connecting, and it was a truly special thing to witness, and to see it continuing has been amazing.
That is so cool. I love that story. And I don't know if this was an objective of his or not, but whether he wanted it to be, he absolutely showed what it's like to be a leader. I mean, if he would have said, all right, let's meet out here on a Friday, and then dropped everybody or dropped even anybody, that's not really a good sign of a leader. Nobody left behind. And that's why it took off, because they got to spend time with the senior executive, and he played a leadership role and made sure that everybody was taken care of.
And I think just to extenuate that a little bit further, I mentioned at the beginning there that, a lot of people perhaps might have perceived him or Vodafone's support of ICE as being kind of a personal thing. Mm-hmm. Almost overnight, everybody understood, hey, this is fantastic. I can be outside, I can be active and healthy, and I can make some really great relationships. The conversations I'm having are much richer than they would be in the office. I'm actually now, meeting my colleague and building these personal relationships because we're doing something that's different. And, it's not in an indoor confined environment. The possibilities are endless. And I think, that sort of enabled him to be able to talk about, well, this is what we're looking to do by supporting ICE, is to meet other people like me in this environment, and I build these great relationships. So, it was a beautiful circle that kind of, helped him explain what ICE is about to his team, but create this culture that in turn then want to feed and actually support him doing things within ICE. You know, they realized what it was. So it's been an amazing journey. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. You couldn't ask for, a better leader in that situation. All right. Well, one of the things that, hopefully is resonating with people as we talk about ICE is the quality of connections, and we talked about this. We went on a ride yesterday together, and Ryan was kind enough to go slow. And I was in the red at heart rate at 180 something, and you were chatting, not even out of breath. But, something we talked about was like, if you look at what's happening on social media today, getting a connection. Instagram is one that comes to mind for me, where, everybody's trying to build an audience. And they're just looking at the number of followers that they have. And so I, noticed, when I'm on Instagram, I start seeing somebody new follow me. Oh, great. Got a new follower. Cool. Must be doing something right with Boost Health or whatever. And then within hours, I'm dropped. I'm no longer followed. And I'm like, okay, that's not a very authentic, real connection. So what you all are doing, I think, is fantastic, because if you leave ICE with 5 new connections, those are actually presumably people that you're really getting to know and that you're going to potentially do business with. Like, if I've got 5 followers on Instagram versus, and that I'll do business with, versus 150 that I'll never even do business with or talk to, it's a much more important connection, right?
And I think, perhaps a better example in our context, perhaps, are platforms like LinkedIn. So LinkedIn is this business community, if you want to call it that, or it's a platform where people exist, and they make connections. They use the term connection. And look, I built a business off the back of LinkedIn, so I'm not suggesting that it's not a good tool, but in the context of making a connection, we often use this term in ICE called real. We're very focused on real, or authentic, I guess, is another way of saying what you're talking about. And I guess I made an observation, particularly with one of our members very early on in the piece. And this particular guy was the head of technology for a big bank. And, they'd just been through this huge transformation program, spent billions and billions of dollars. Lots of different organizations were involved in that, software companies and so forth. And so he was the most popular guy in town. He couldn't walk down the street without people coming up to him and having a chat to him and saying, "Hey, how are you? Good to see you," And he was invited to all the best stuff and over to the US and launches and everything else. Anyway, he finished the project, and as so often happens, they then bring in a different leadership team to kind of maintain the great stuff that's been done. Right. And so he wasn't working; he was on cycling leave, as we like to call it. And all of a sudden, he needed to start thinking about, I need to probably put myself in the market to see what else is out there. And of course, the phone didn't ring. He wasn't as popular as he was previously, and probably there was a reflection for him too, to also realize, hey, you know what? Probably didn't spend a lot of time making some real connections. That period of time was really a lot about getting some stuff done. And I felt great because everybody wanted to talk to me. But, it was about something. It wasn't about me. It was about what I was trying to achieve. And I think, in many ways, I'm anti social media platforms because they're all about followers and friends and connections. And most of the time, people don't spend any time together. The irony of this is we're building a technology platform. But I guess the difference for me is the technology platform that we're investing in is about creating the connections so as the physical interaction can happen. There's something here between you and I having a conversation. I can look across the room here, see your body language, really understand and connect with you. And I think that technology or these platforms are moving us into an area where the authenticity of the connection is lost, and so consequently people are chasing numbers, like you said earlier on. I remember a while ago I was in a position where I had a sales team, and I used to say to the guys, so what's your relationship profile like? Who do you know in the market? And they were always quick to fire back. I've got over 500 connections on LinkedIn. And one test I've always said to people is, look, here's a test. When you have a job, when you have particularly our members, when you're the CXO of a big organization, you make 500 phone calls, you'll have 500 people call you back. You leave 500 messages, they'll all call you back. you leave 500 messages when you no longer have that role, you see how many people call you back. Yeah, and the same thing applies to friends, right? So, they're your friends. If you might have 1,000 friends on Facebook. If you call them all up and leave a message and say, hey, I've got a problem. Can you give me a call back? You see how many friends call you back. And that person that calls you back and says, hey, what's wrong? Without knowing what the issue is, to say, hey, how can I help? That's a friend. And forget everybody else that Facebook tells you is a friend. They're not a friend. It's just a digital connection. It means nothing. So I think, my purpose in life, perhaps in some ways, is about creating this platform to enable these people to make these relationships real, give them some substance. Riding a bike is a great way to go and do that, but ultimately it's about making that relationship real. So, I get a bit emotional about the whole thing because, like I said, the platforms are great for finding people, to follow things up, to organize to go and do something. But don't sit back and think that, well, I've made a connection to Paul and that's it. We're friends now. So, let's invest a bit more of ourselves in one another. And I think we'll find something pretty special there.
So I'm interested in this platform. I know you're still in the development phase of it. It sounds like it's really just going to complement what you're already doing. So we'll make a connection at an ICE event, and then we can go back and connect on the platform and just stay in touch virtually until we can see each other again. Is that kind of the idea?
A little bit, yeah. And we're fortunate to work with some amazing organisations who are bringing some expertise into the platform. But it's very much focused at our community, so we our member base, and what it's doing, I guess, principally, is enabling our members to see one another. So who else is within the community?
Oh, nice.
And let me create a wish list, if you want to call it that way, of people that I'd like to ride with or I'd like to meet at some point. They might mean something to me professionally. There may be someone there I really want to connect with because they're in the same industry or they have the same role or whatever it might be. Or the other component is we have a pool from Strava, which is obviously an amazing platform, which enables us to have an analytical view of their cycling ability. Right. Over time, our predictive component of the platform will enable our members to connect with other people who are a bit like them. It could be that somebody arrives in New York and the app will enable them to say, hey, Paul, welcome to New York. Here's 3 members within the ICE community that you might want to go for a ride with. And it'll use the predictive analytics of your history to say, you like to ride with people who a disability based on your riding ability. And we know that your business profile, the people that you're interested in meeting, look a bit like this. So it actually starts to suggest people that you might want to go for a ride with, and the ability to book a bike and rent and all that sort of stuff, but also to create a ride, to actually enable them to say, hey, let's go for a ride for 40K around Central Park, leaving at this point, coming back to this coffee shop. So actually plan the ride ahead of time and then invite other members to participate on that ride too.
Oh, that's neat.
Yeah.
Do you guys have an idea of when you're going to try to launch
Well,
it?
we're in sort of beta now. So there are probably about 300 members within the community that have access to the app and are
cool.
using it. Like with all these things, you got to kind of keep testing and learning. Mm-hmm. So
ready, fire, aim.
Yeah, ready, fire, aim. Exactly. Yeah, I like that. Yeah. So we've fired, and now we're trying to work out the aim bit. But I think the most interesting thing to me is when I talk to members about that, you see their eyes widen. I was talking to somebody last night, and he travels a bit to Kuala Lumpur, and he was saying, I'd love to connect with people when I get up there. There's no one really for me to ride with, and I'd love to meet ICE people up there. I said, well, we've got an app and, you can connect with members. And we sat there for a couple of minutes and you could see his eyes widen and go, this is amazing.
Yeah.
Now there's a difference between people thinking something's great and doing something with it.
Right.
And that's the difference, So look, I think, but I guess the point I'm making here is whilst all these other technology platforms are principally about making the connection, I want to go beyond that. I actually want to physically make the interaction.
Right.
And I think the physical interaction, whether it's a ride, whether it's just a cup of coffee, but having the time to be with someone, I think that's really where the value is.
I want to talk about cycle commuting. My last show, or 2 shows ago, I guess it was, I call him the king of cycle commuting. It's a friend of mine back in Kansas in the U.S. And if you're not familiar with the weather in the Midwest in the U.S., you get all seasons and all extremes of each season. And so he has been cycle commuting for over 8 years, pretty much every workday, all through the year. And so he's got some pretty amazing stories, and all the gear and everything. So anyway, it's a neat episode. You have to listen if you haven't heard it. But what I'd like to know from you, Ryan, is one of the things we talked about is that cycle commuting, the health benefits of it. I think it's easy to study because there's less variables because people do it fairly often usually. The health benefits are astounding, like reduced all-cause mortality and reduced cancer, obviously increased cardiovascular ability. So have you seen any of your ICE connections make it so that they could commute together outside of the ICE events, like whether they're like meeting somewhere and cycling into work or riding home or anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, lots of stories and examples. But there's a few sort of things that spring to mind, particularly when you're talking about commuting. A lot of people probably don't know that, I believe it's Strava's second biggest revenue stream, or certainly for a long time, has been from, government organisations or local councils that have the ability to acquire the Strava data. And what they're doing with that Strava data is actually looking at the heat maps to see where people are riding and some indication of numbers. Not everybody who's commuting is using Strava. Perhaps most people aren't, but there's enough there that they can see the corridors of where people are riding or where they're riding from and the destinations where they're riding to. So what that enables those the councils to do, or the governments in this case, is to do some amazing urban planning to make sure that they're creating the corridors that are relevant to those commuters. And I think that cycle commuting is only getting bigger. I live in Sydney and it's a pretty hilly place, and with the advent of things like electric bikes and so forth, and the cost of those coming down over time, I think we're going to see more and more people riding in. As a consequence of that, we run a format called with the bunch. So bring our members together. A lot of our sessions are breakfast with the bunch, so a ride before work, particularly in Australia. And we encourage members to come together and ride. And I talked a little bit about that app earlier on, where we have the home base area of each member. So again, when we're suggesting members that you may want to go for a ride with, that it'll tell you that there's a member that lives around the corner from you.
Oh, nice.
So all of a sudden, you can now not just plan to go for a ride. You can decide, hey, listen, I'm going to commute in on a Wednesday. Do you fancy doing that with me? And then we're seeing this happening more and more now. And so we organise with our bunch sessions at what we call a bike bus. So essentially a bunch of members getting together, it's normally pretty early in the morning, 5 o'clock, and then riding from wherever they live into where our sessions might be held. And because they then make those connections on the way in, they then start saying, well, I'm off into the office afterwards, as many of them do. And then say, well, we should ride back together. And nice. We're noticing as a result of that. And particularly, I was with one of our members last week who's the Asia Pacific CEO of JLL, the big property company.
Yeah.
And he was telling me, particularly while we're on the subject of commuting, just the sheer volume of requirements for tenants. So JLL, for those people that don't know, they'll manage properties for the property owner, but they'll also help tenants find property space for them to move into. And the requirement for end of trip facilities for cycling is just going through the roof. And so consequently, a lot of new buildings or a lot of existing buildings are converting car spaces, car floors to become change and end of trip facilities. So cycling commuting is something that is getting bigger and bigger. It's very different from the racing and the Lycra wearers that are out there. But it's a thing. And I think that like I said, we deal with the leaders and the influencers in the corporate world, and obviously they're already bought in. And it's we talked a bit earlier on about how they can create that culture. So the next step beyond that is then having the facilities to do it.